Bright Duty. Every student matters.
Hi students, now we are going to start with the other part of the nervous system. First was the CNS that we talked about, that is the brain and the spinal cord. Now we are going to talk about PNS, that is the peripheral nervous system. So what exactly is the peripheral nervous system? Peripheral nervous system consists of all the nerves arising from brain and the spinal cord. So we saw there are two types of nerves basing on the origin. One was the cranial nerves that originated from the brain, and the other was the spinal nerves which originated from the spinal cord. So all of these nerves are under, or they are under the control of PNS, that is the peripheral nervous system. Overall, it consists of two kinds of pathways. First is the afferent or receiving sensory pathway, and the other is the efferent, that is carrying away motor pathways. That means when we were talking about the function of the nervous system, we said that there were three functions. One was the sensory, right? Other was the integration of data, and then third was the motor. So sensory is basically receiving the information, the data integration was processing, and motor was the effect, right? What should be the effect of the information that we received. So sensory, obviously the PNS has two parts. Both the functions of sensory and motor are associated with the neurons. So two important pathways. First is the receiving or the efferent, the afferent sensory pathway, and the other is the efferent, that is the carrying away, that is the motor pathway. So always remember students, both of these terms are very important. It will come over and over again, it will be repeated during the session. Afferent and efferent pathways. Now first let's talk about the afferent pathway. The afferent or receiving or sensory pathways are included in two kinds of nerves. So there are two nerves which function in this pathway. First is the purely sensory nerve. That means only the function is to get the sensory information. These are for example, the cranial nerves received from the eyes, ears, nose. So these are purely sensory nerves. That means the nerves which are coming from the eye towards the brain, from the nose towards the brain, and from the ears towards the brain. So these are your some of the example of purely sensory nerves are certain cranial nerves which are getting information directly from your sense organs. Then there are other type of afferent nerves. Those are the mixed cranial nerves, like the fifth, that is the facial nerve, which contains sensory fibers bringing sensations from the face. But it also contains motor fibers which carry impulses away to the jaw muscle. So this is the mixed cranial nerve, and the number 5, the nerve which is numbered as fifth, that is the facial nerve, which contains both the type of fibers. One is bringing the information from the face, and other is taking the information towards the jawbone, right? So jawbone obviously is associated with the face only. So the information going towards the brain, coming back to the brain, is happening with the help of a single nerve, that is the mixed cranial nerve number 5, also called as the facial nerve. So you can see that in the afferent, that is the one which is receiving the information, there are two types. One is the purely sensory and the other is the mixed type, that is both sensory as well as motor. Then next you have the efferent pathway, that is the sending pathway. They may be subdivided into somatic and autonomic nervous system, right? Somatic nervous system basically controls the voluntary muscles. Now this is something which we have already established, that voluntary muscles are the ones which do the function as per our choice, right? If I want to pick up this pen, if I want to leave it, if I want to move my hand like that, all of this is voluntary, all of this is something which I want to do, right? So somatic nerves are basically, they control the motor functions, that is the voluntary functions. So it includes most of the cranial nerves as well as the motor nerves of spinal, motor nerve fibers of spinal nerves, right? Now, both of these nerves, that is the cranial nerves and these motor nerves, they carry the information from the CNS to the voluntary muscles. So this is how it functions, right? So it carries the information from the central nervous system to the voluntary muscles to perform a certain action. Then you have the next part, that is the autonomous or autonomic nervous system, called as the ANS. This innervates the involuntary muscles and glands. Now involuntary is something which is not under our control, right? So it is functioning along with the involuntary muscles and glands, right? When we will go further, you will see that what is exactly the function of ANS, and then you will be able to relate it in a better way. So basically it consists of chains of ganglia and nerves, right? And these are present on either side of the backbone. Why on the either side of the backbone? Because within the backbone there is a spinal cord, right? And it is present on both the sides, and obviously because it is involuntary, so a lot of spinal nerves are associated with ANS, right? So this system, this ANS, is basically a motor system that functions closely with the involuntary muscles, and they produce certain kind of reactions in certain kind of situations, right? Now there are two types of afferent, or rather there are two parts of your ANS, that is the autonomic nervous system. One is the sympathetic nervous system and other is the parasympathetic nervous system. What are these two parts? Let's understand. So this is parasympathetic and this is sympathetic. Now it is controlled, as you can see, mainly by the spinal cord. Over here if you see, it is controlled by the spinal cord, and that's why we were saying that the nerves which are associated with ANS, which is associated with the efferent pathway, are present on the either side of the backbone, because it is mainly consisting, or mainly the information is coming from the spinal cord. Now over here you can see that sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves are actually functioning in the antagonistic way, meaning that sympathetic nervous system is, the sympathetic nerves are causing the pupils to dilate. On the other hand, the parasympathetic is causing the constriction of the pupils. Now here it is important to understand that sympathetic nerves, actually what it does, it prepares the body for emergency situations. Now if you look at what the sympathetic nervous system is doing, you will be able to understand. It dilates the pupils, it relaxes the airway so that more and more air can come in, increases the heartbeat, inhibit the activity of the stomach, stimulates the release of glucose, that means more and more glucose so that you have more energy, then inhibits the activity of intestines, secretes epinephrine and norepinephrine, that means to prepare your body for emergency. It relaxes the bladder, that's why many times you will see that people, those who are in certain situations, emergency situations, or they are very scared, they usually wet themselves because the bladder gets relaxed. Promote ejaculation and vaginal contraction. So you can see that these are certain special situations for which the body is preparing us with the help of the sympathetic nerves. Now the body obviously, or the situation will not remain all the time, it will wave off. Suppose let's say the emergency situation is that you see a dog, right, but the dog will eventually go off, the emergency situation will be gone after some time. So the body needs to come back to its original state. It should be relaxed. So after that, what happens is the parasympathetic nervous system takes over. Once the emergency situation is dealt with, the parasympathetic nerves, what it does you can say it changes whatever, or rather it relaxes the body, and whatever changes were done by sympathetic nervous system goes back. That means dilation of pupil which happened during the sympathetic nervous system, it comes back and the pupil will constrict. Then it will stimulate the saliva. Now the sympathetic system actually inhibits the saliva. That means your mouth starts becoming dry. But over here, as soon as the emergency situation is dealt with, the body will come back to its relaxed stage, constrict the airways, slow the heartbeat towards the normal heartbeat which is there. It stimulates the activity of stomach, intestine, inhibits the release of glucose, contracts the bladder, and so on and so forth. So there are the functions over here, you can see, are antagonistic in nature. That means they are opposite to one another, right? So now let's, with the help of this table, let's understand that what are the effect of sympathetic and parasympathetic activities on the certain organs. First we have eye pupil, right? So under the effect of sympathetic activity, the pupil gets dilated. Under parasympathetic, it gets constricted. Now remember students, in this table you will be able to clearly identify that these two activities, sympathetic and parasympathetic, are both antagonistic to each other. That means they are both opposite to each other. Heartbeat is speeded up, it is slowed down, right? Then blood vessels on the skin and on the muscles. So both of these are different. On the skin, blood vessels gets constricted, and the reason is, you will see that when a person is under the fear of something, when he or she is scared, you will feel that the person is going pale, right? The reason is that the blood supply is restricted towards the skin, and more blood supply is sent towards the muscle, so that certain activity can be done. Suppose there is a dog and you need to run away from it, so more and more blood is needed in your muscles, right? So the blood is supplied, more and more blood is supplied in the muscles. So a person looks pale in these situations because of the constriction of the blood vessel on your skin. In the muscles, it gets dilated so that more and more blood can be reached there. When under parasympathetic activities, the color comes back to the face, to the body, that paleness goes away because again the blood vessels come back to its original. Then bronchioles are dilated so that more and more oxygen and air can be taken in, and then it gets constricted. Constricted means not more than normal, it just comes back to the normal size. Urinary bladder, the muscles get relaxed. You will see that the muscles will get relaxed, and a person when afraid will usually pass off the urine, right? The muscles contract, that means feeling of urination, right? So suppose in this case, let's say a person's bladder was already full. So when the muscles relax, obviously the bladder, the person might wet himself or may have the urge of going to washroom. But when the suppose the bladder was empty, at that point this when the parasympathetic this activity happens, a person has the urge to urinate. Then sweat secretion, sphincter contracted, right, and parasympathetic sphincter is relaxed. Then blood sugar is increased, there is no effect, right? Whatever increased blood sugar was there would have been used during that activity. So there is no corresponding or antagonistic activity in the parasympathetic. Then salivary secretion stops, the mouth feels dry, but as soon as the emergency situation is gone, it increases and you can feel the saliva coming back to your mouth. Tear glands are activated. So a person, when he or she is very afraid, sometimes involuntarily they start tearing up, right? They don't want to cry, but if they start tearing up, it becomes really, this situation happens, right? And then this process slows down after the emergency situation is gone. Erector muscle of the skin stimulated, hair raised. goosebumps, which we call as, you can feel the hair raising on your skin. So which we call as goosebumps. It happens whenever there is, let's say somebody is telling you a very scary ghost story, you will feel goosebumps, your hair rising, right? So this is something which happens in the sympathetic activity, and again during the parasympathetic activity, this muscle gets relaxed again. Then organ, that is adrenal gland, increased secretion of adrenaline, that is the emergency hormone. There is no effect of parasympathetic on this. Then intestine, peristalsis decreases, right, whereas it comes back, the peristalsis increases and it comes back to its original way, that the way in which it was working. Then stomach glands, decreased secretion, that means that digestion doesn't occur, whereas after the emergency situation has been dealt with, the secretion becomes normal. Right. So over here you will see that how the ANS, that is the autonomic nervous system, which has two parts, that is the sympathetic and parasympathetic, they both are able to control the involuntary functions. Whatever functions I just discussed with you, all these functions are involuntary. None of them were voluntary where you had any control. So whenever there was an emergency situation, you feel all of these symptoms, your hair rising, your mouth drying, you know, all of these things are felt, right? But nothing is something which is in your control, right? Obviously, you can train your brain not to be afraid of something, right? Many people are afraid of dog, they really love the dog, right? So they have trained their brain not to fear the dog, right? But somebody who has that fear obviously will undergo all of these changes when placed in that situation, right? So PNS is basically, it is a huge network. When we were looking at the diagrams also, we saw that PNS was the huge network of both the types of nerves, that is your spinal as well as cranial nerves, right? So both the types of nerves were associated with the PNS, right? Cranial nerves are linked to the brain obviously, and the spinal nerves are linked to the spine, right? So both of these are present in the PNS. It contains sensory receptors which help in processing the information which it is getting from the sense organ. Obviously, all the functions that are happening are because of the sense organs, and they help us in perceiving what is happening around us, in in understanding our environment, right? So the information which is collected from the sense organ is sent to the CNS with the help of the afferent sensory nerves. This information is processed and then the information comes back through the efferent nerves, right? Now, basing on the information which has been received, which has been processed, either there will be some somatic effect to it. That means maybe you're, suppose you're feeling thirsty, or let's say you have eaten something and then now you feel the urge to drink, right? So you will pick up the bottle and you will drink. This is a somatic function which is happening. There is no emergency situation in it, but sometimes there might be an emergency situation. That means, let's say you saw a dog and you are afraid and you want to run away. So that is something which is happening to ANS. Now understand, running away is again something which also is somatic, right? This, apart from the autonomous activity which is happening in your body, somatic nerves also, or the somatic pathway also plays an important role, right? So whatever you have seen around you, whatever information that you gather with the help of your nervous system, with the help of your sense organ, is processed, the information, then it comes back, and then so many other things happen, and then you find that the control is, the PNS controls various ways in which the information is sent, whether it is being sent to the brain or whether it is sent to the, your voluntary muscles or involuntary muscles. So somatic, the somatic part of the PNS controls the voluntary muscles, the ANS part controls the involuntary muscles and glands, right? So I hope you were able to understand the importance of PNS and what are the different components of PNS.